Welcome to KOIN Conversations. I'm Lisa Balick. My guest today is Larry O'Neill, who is a state climatologist and a professor at Oregon State University. Larry, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Big question we have right now is the drought that we've been in. People wonder, is it going to stay? Are we just not going to see any real snowfall in the mountains, which we so desperately need for not just skiing, but for water?
Well, this big midwinter dry spell that we're in right now is really concerning because of the really poor snowpack that we had. And so we got a lot of rain in December and November, but it was very little snow. We are really relying on either a February or March miracle to kind of catch us up to that right now.
Is that something that's likely to happen based on past history?
So right now we're at a point that with each passing dry day, we're getting very much less likely to get the amount of snow and the amount of rain that we need to catch us back up. And so we're right now preparing for drought conditions in spring and summer. And that's going to be really concerning in terms of wildfire risk. And so there could be really dire consequences for both agricultural production in spring and summer, and also in our wildfire risk. A lot of agricultural and livestock producers right now are starting to prepare for their growing seasons. Right now, the reservoirs are doing okay, but going forward, we do expect there'll be pretty big consequences for that.
When you look back in past years, is there a percentage or likelihood of us being able to make it up in February, March?
Basically, our biggest concern right now is with the snowpack. And so going back into, looking at how February, March goes, there have been instances where we have had better accumulations of the snowpack or big buildups that have occurred during those periods, but it's not terribly likely at this point.
We look at what's happening, we're now in this period of time we're doing this interview in towards the end of January, and we're seeing a big storm moving its way through the Midwest, the South, the East Coast, but not here. And what a lot of people think is, well, the weather starts here and moves east. So how did we get forgotten by this, I guess, at this point?
A big correlation between what happens in the east and what happens to us. So when we get the big, what they call the polar vortex out east, we tend to be much drier than normal. And so when that happens, those are correlated because of the how the jet stream moves around, the northern hemisphere. And so when that pattern happens back east, we're really dry out here.
What happens with science in the sense that we hear about cloud seeding? We hear about different technology that's used to impact what is occurring naturally and make a change. Is there anything like that happening or going to happen in the weather world to make some changes other than Mother Nature doing whatever happens?
And there's really nothing we could do in terms of making it rain out here when we need it to, or making it snow when we need it to. There's cloud seeding programs that do occur in parts of the country, but they have really minimal impact on the amount of precipitation we get. So there's not much we could do about it at this time.
So is weather one of those phenomenons that whether it's now or 100 years ago, it really is what it is?
We do have a lot of variability within our weather. I mean, there is the changing climate, which can change weather patterns around the country and around the world.
When you look at what's happening, what do you see as really interesting from your perspective?
The really interesting trends that we're doing right now is the increasing occurrence of drought in the western United States. So the kind of these increased variability in the snowpack, and then also these increasing temperatures are actually increasing evaporation, which dries out the landscape a lot quicker in the spring and summer. And those are one of the things that we're really tracking right now and trying to make sense of is how this affects our water supply during the spring and summer when we really need the water the most. The Pacific Northwest is, you kind of think about it as a place that is, very wet. You think about it as a kind of a rainforest type of regime. And right now, what we're seeing is that we're drying out a lot faster than a lot of the other places in the country.
Companies that come to you and say, look, we want to look down the road, like what's going to be happening, so that they can make some changes in either how they do business, type of products, whether it be the type of seed that's grown, looking at industries that depend on water so much and look down the road and say, well, if it's not going to be there, we need to know now.
We get a lot less hydroelectric power generation, and so that has an impact on the availability of power and the price of it. Second thing is just our food. So Oregon is agriculture is a very important part of Oregon's economy.
As far as food that's grown, we obviously, like you said, are a big agriculture region outside of the metro area. And people wonder whether or not are we going to move towards, we look at Arizona as a very dry area and wonder how can they grow anything there? What about what's going to happen here? I mean, are you seeing industries that say we are going to be doing things differently? We're going to switch what we grow, or just switch varieties? What do you hear from some of the people that you talk with?
Yeah, so right now there's, for instance, in the Willamette Valley, they're the people who grow grapes or grow berries or things like that are really thinking about changing their varieties so that they can be a little more resistant to drought. So there's a lot of food that grows, that's grown historically here in the Willamette Valley and in Oregon that relies on a certain range of temperatures, a certain range of precipitation, and when that changes, then it changes their business structure and how they can remain profitable as well.
Do you talk with other state climatologists, with other states as to what they're dealing with, what they're facing?
Yes, especially in the Pacific Northwest and in California, and each state has their own uh, you know range of conditions that they're dealing with. Oregon is kind of similar to Washington, and it's there's some similarities to Idaho, for instance, what we consider Pacific Northwest. Basically, water supply is the biggest thing that we think of, and the seasonality of it. We all depend very much on the winter snowpack.
You mentioned Idaho, and I think of Idaho as mostly much drier climate than Oregon. I mean, just, Oregon's so green. Idaho's generally not as green, mostly brown from the desert and from the dry areas. How do you kind of link them to? I mean, do we end up learning from Idaho as to what they do and how they use the water that they have or conserve?
So with storms, a lot of their precipitation, a lot of their water supply comes from storms that pass through Oregon and Washington as well. And so we can definitely learn from what they're doing in terms of their reservoir management and how they adapt to their agricultural and livestock production. And they also are trending in the same direction that we are in terms of wildfire risk.
One other area, just to wrap up here, is we don't hear a lot about conserving water in Oregon. You see that in California, obviously. You don't hear a lot about it, about alternate day watering or, just don't run the water, those kinds of things. Is that something that is coming, or I'm just surprised that if we're at this point now in the year thinking we may be in serious trouble, that it's something that people should be thinking about or the message going out?
So in Oregon, we're actually quite blessed, and in Washington too, but we're quite blessed with enough water. So even in the driest of years, we usually get enough rainfall and snowpack that we can satisfy our needs for domestic water supply. And so it thinks about drinking water and things like that, even though there are some exceptions. But when we think about places that are much more water limited, like California, where they have a much bigger population and a much bigger domestic water supply need, we kind of think about what happens down there. But up here, we tend to not to have that as much, at least widespread. We do have places in the state where it's a little bit more variable. And I'll point to last year's droughts, for instance, along the coast, in a coastal mountain range in Oregon. We had a lot less. We had a really dry spring and a really dry summer, and so some of the water supply systems on the coast um, were, they had voluntary conservation measures and things like that. Lincoln
Do you think
City
we're
is
going to see that around here?
no, not imminently, at least for that. What we end up seeing though is that most of our water supply goes to agricultural and livestock production, and so those are the systems that are suffer the most when we have a drought year.
So it's the industries that could be in trouble.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Larry O'Neill, state climatologist, thanks for joining me on KOIN Conversations. We'll hope that we see that snowpack go and grow in the next I don't know, I want to say couple months, but sooner rather than later, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, hopefully we're hoping for a miracle February, March.
All right, thanks, Larry. Appreciate the time.